everybody, welcome back to the next dev diary for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Empire City. Last time around, we tried to talk about boss battles, and I think we did an okay job, but really, we just kind of started fanboying about Bebop and Rocksteady, which kind of got us thinking, like, man, there are some great characters in this game. Maybe it's time we talk a little bit more about some of them. You know, I've seen in the trailer, I saw Karai pop up. I know we've talked a little bit about this is a world where Shredder is no longer with us. Fill me in. Ace, tell me, Tom, what can folks expect here with Karai?
Yeah, so the Karai of Empire City was heavily influenced by the Karai from Mirage and IDW. It's in some combination. And I guess if you're a fan, obviously, of the 2003 show, that has a lot of connection to all that as well. In the original Mirage comics, spoiler alert for anybody who's still reading, at a point in time, the Shredder is gone, and then the head of the Japanese Foot Clan, who is Karai, comes to the United States to try to get a stranglehold over the civil war that has erupted within the Foot Clan, between those who sort of devout to the Shredder and those who are like taking it a different direction, if you want to call it. There's actually like the Foot accountants and some scientists, but we won't get into all that. I'm not the comic historian. I'm not gonna make that happen today. But I was always really fascinated by Karai as a character. Because she sort of sits on so many sides and is always doing it in service of the Foot Clan, is always trying to decide the best way to lead and how to gain power, and sometimes the right ways, and dips her toes in the wrong ways to kind of bring it forward. So that is in spades in our game, but the difference in our game is that she's not deciding that purely on her own. That's all being driven by the player decisions, and so that's really the big difference with the Karai and ours. Like, she's not on rails. She's not heading somewhere predictable. It's how you behave, I suppose, if you want to think of it that way.
Ooh, can you talk a little bit more about that, Ace? How does that work under the hood a little bit? What sort of give me a non-story spoiler example of something that someone might do that might tweak Karai's expectations?
Yeah, no, there are some life and death situations where the player can choose for somebody to live or for somebody to die, and death actually might seem like the preferable choice in the way that it's generally presented. Life might be the harder choice, and you'd be surprised, like, maybe what direction people get swayed. But we try to put the player in some not impossible decisions. I think for the most part they'll get a vibe for potentially which way we're having them go. But it's all about, I think, the iteration of the Turtles that they are potentially role-playing, or be honest, maybe their own sense of leadership, morals, and guidance will take them in a direction that might surprise them. And those decisions come up from time to time, especially at the end of major chapters and things like that. So that we try to give the player enough context as like where that decision might lead, and then we're really curious to see where people take it and what do they teach Karai along the way. That'll be an interesting thing to see.
That's awesome. So as they teach Karai through experience, can players end up with different endings? Is it like, walk me through that? What are the ramifications, big picture?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, this is still an indie title, so we couldn't go crazy. There are two major outcomes of the game based on those decisions. So you have several chances to fork in either direction, and depending on the totality of your behavior and decision making throughout the game, it'll fork in one or the other. So.
Awesome. Well, when I think about the Ninja Turtles, my mind immediately goes to early 2000s Gwyneth Paltrow. So this feels very sliding doors to me, in a way, right? Sorry, it's the best I got, guys. Not great at segues. But Tom, from a story perspective, out of curiosity, like, knowing that this character can veer one of two ways and is going to have different reactions based on the way that players perform, how do you guys handle that from a story creation?
It's funny. I've kind of had experience with this as a writer on video games. I worked on a game called Silent Hill Downpour back in the day, and Silent Hill is very famous for that kind of forking storytelling and multiple endings. One thing, I mean, just from like a technical aspect or like a mechanical aspect, it allows for better playability, I think, in multiple plays. So you can play one way, and now you can go back, play that same game, and kind of have even a new experience. And I think that's awesome for people. They're going to spend the money on a game, they're going to want to get something out of it. So I think that's something that I really appreciate in this type of thing. As far as storytelling, and Ace will attest to this, these branching storylines can get complicated. So you've got to make sure that if you're going this way, it makes just as much sense as if they go that way. It can't be out of character that, oh, you did this, so So now Karai is going to be completely out of character. In this story, Karai stays in character the entire time. So if what you do in the game kind of pushes her in this direction, it'll be a Karai direction. It makes sense that she would go that way just as much as it would this way. I've always looked at Karai. She's probably my favorite character, just about definitely top 3. And I've always looked at her as what I call a hinge character. So a lot of results hinge on her reactions or her actions. And so I look at her as she's like Michael Corleone. If Shredder is the Godfather, she's Michael Corleone. She kind of gets pulled into things because Shredder tends to go off track. He gets power corrupted or he gets too hyper focused on one enemy and not paying attention to the bigger picture. So like including in the Mirage book, she comes in to fix things. That was the point of Karai, and they did a good job of that in the 2003 show, the 4Kids show, which inspired a lot of what I've done. That between the Mirage and the 4Kids, that's my 2 main inspirations always. But I think Karai across the board in all these iterations always is that interesting character that you almost feel like she's doing this because she realizes somebody has to do it, and I'm the one to do it because nobody else is looking at the big picture. But because it is a big picture, there are a lot of directions you can go, and this game is no exception. I think that's what makes her such a fascinating character. And the funny thing is, Karai, over time, even in our comics, as much as you see her, she's a kind of a soft-spoken character, in my opinion. She doesn't, monologue. She doesn't, she's not this villain that's going to go out there and twist her mustache and stuff. She's all business, but her business is the Foot Clan, and she has a belief that a Foot Clan should be balanced. It shouldn't just be all about crime. There's an honor aspect. There's all these things that need to be involved, and if it starts going in one direction or the other too much, she tries to rein it in. Because to her, the clan is the most important thing. It's how he did it in the IDW comics, and I feel like, when other creators kind of handle her that way, you realize the characters kind of become larger than life because it's almost like that's a real person. That's how this real person will react. I'm putting her in my story, so let's keep that consistent. And it's the same thing here, and I'm really excited because Ace and the team, they really came up with a cool story. This story is really cool, and I think especially Karai stands are going to be very happy.
Awesome, that's great. Now, out of curiosity, I know that we say that our version of the Turtles is inspired by IDW. Sometimes we call it IDW adjacent,
Yes.
but the reality is we are in our own separate branch of the Turtles story, right? We've built our own thing.
Yeah.
So in Empire City's version of the Turtles. Do the boys already have an established relationship with Karai? Are they familiar with Karai, or is this brand new? Is it someone coming in? They have no idea who this is.
No, they have no idea who this is, and actually, just like a spoiler from the trailer, they're coming upon Karai for the very first time on that rooftop where the other brothers are tied up, no one knows who each other is. So they're going through the situation, and they're both think they're supposed to be fighting each other, and so it kind of boils over. Then they learn who the other party is, and then alliances form basically to figure out the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Do it that way.
So for folks,
that's a good
sorry,
point,
Tom, go
though.
ahead.
She is very much for a warrior. I always call her like a political. She's a politician too. She knows
Right, exactly.
that there has to be negotiation. Sometimes there has to be compromise. Where Shredder is kill them all, destroy them. I'm the boss. I'm the dictator. Whatever you want to call him. He is Master Shredder of the Foot Clan, and everybody bows to him. And Karai has that nuance, that the ability to realize, in this situation, I need to pull back a little bit and give. Because if I'm going to take later, I need to give sometimes. And I think this story does a really good job of showing that aspect to her, where she knows that nothing is black and white. That to really run that type of criminal organization, she has to be willing to make compromises and sacrifices.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's what makes her work so well as a character. Because despite anything else, her loyalty to her clan will ultimately win out any single time. So it makes her so incredibly complex in a way that makes her malleable to what we're doing, at least with this game, but also just from a story perspective, just so much fun. It's just because you could justify nearly every action, but it always kind of makes sense. And so you really keep the player and the reader on their toes. So super fun. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So, okay. someone like me who just saw the trailer, right, was pulling from that, saw the brief clip of Karai.
Sure.
Safe to assume after this conversation, not just a cameo?
No, well, I mean, kind of the core of the story.
Would it be fair to call Karai the big baddie? Is she the big baddie of this game?
I don't know.
Oh.
I mean, I guess she could be, but I guess it really depends on. I guess that depends on how you play. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what she decides to do in the end.
Can we maybe talk about that next time?
Let's talk about
Maybe
it.
next time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That sounds
Perfect.
good. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you tuning in.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Bye.